Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let us continue with our tafsir of Surah An-Nisaa. Bihawlillahi wa quwwatih. We are on ayah number 12. قال الله تعالى: وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمْ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْنَ مِنْ بعد وصية يوصين بها أو دين ولهن الربع مما تركتم إن لم يكن لكم ولد فإن كان لكم ولد فلهن الثمن مما تركتم من بعد وصية توصون بها أو دين وإن كان رجل يورث كلالة أو امرأة وله أخ أو أخت فلكل واحد منهما السدس فإن كانوا أكثر من ذلك فهم شركاء في الثلث من بعد وصية يوصى بها أو دين غير مضار وصية من الله والله عليم حليم. Let's just recap what happened in ayah number 11. Allah Jalla wa Ala gave us rulings of the inheritance. He began by talking about the inheritance of your children, so sons and daughters, and that the son receives twice the share of the daughter if you die leaving behind children. Then he made mention of the daughter and gave some extra detail. If the daughter you leave behind is alone, so does not have a brother or sister, then she receives a half of your wealth. If there are two daughters only without any sons that you have left behind, then these two daughters or more, so 3, 4, 5 and so on, will share in 2/3 of your total wealth. Then he spoke about your parents, and he said that if you leave children behind, then both your parents will receive a 1/6. Then he made a special mention of the mother. He said that if you have no children that you have left behind and your parents inherit from you, then the mother receives a 1/3, and thus implying, though not stating explicitly, that the father receives 2/3, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio. He also mentioned that your siblings affect the inheritance of your mother. If you have 2 or more siblings, and these are any siblings, consanguine, uterine, or full, then your mother is reduced to a 1/6. Otherwise, if you just have 1 sibling or no siblings, then your mother will receive a 1/3, all else being equal. In this particular ayah, he's now going to speak about 2 categories of people, the spouse and the uterine siblings. So first of all, the vocabulary, walakum, and for you, he's speaking to the males, half of what your azwaj, your wives, have left behind if they, meaning your wives, do not have a walad, a child. So if your wives do not have any inheriting children, this could be from your marriage or from a previous marriage. If they have no inheriting children, you will have a nisf, which is a half of their wealth. Then he says, but if they have a walad, meaning a child, that's a male or a female, then you, meaning you husbands, will take 1/4 of what they leave behind, after the wasiyah which they have made, or debt. And we spoke about this in the previous ayah. Then he talks about the inheritance of the wives, after mentioning the husbands. So he says that they will have 1/4 of what you have left behind if you do not have any children. So if the husband does not have any inheriting children from any marriage whatsoever, then the wife will receive 1/4. Now it should be noted that if the man leaves behind multiple wives, 2, 3 or 4 wives, then all the wives will share in this fraction of 1/4. Then he says, but if there are some children which the husband leaves behind, then the wives will have a thumun, which is an 1/8. And again, this is after the wasiyah has been dealt with and the debts which have been dealt with. Then he says, if a man or a woman is inherited from kalalatan, then what does this mean? First of all, kalala, it simply means a person who has no parents nor any children, so that the only people inheriting from him are from the side, meaning from his siblings and or uncles and cousins as well. So going downwards, that's your children. Going upwards, that's your parents. Ayah number 11 dealt with that. This ayah is dealing about people on the side, neither up or down, but on the side. These will be your siblings. Why is kalalatan mansub bil fatha? It is a hal of the deceased person. So this deceased person is inherited from as kalala. Kalala comes from the word iklil, which is a crown, which obviously wraps around the head. And so the kalala is a person who has neither parents nor children, so his inheritors, who are from the hawashi, from the sides, like we said, they essentially wrap around him. So the ayah says that such a person, if he has an akhun, which is a brother, or ukhtun, which is a sister, then each one of them will have a sixth. That is to say, if he has left just one brother or just one sister, they will have a sixth. Then he says, if they are more than that, meaning if these brothers and sisters are two or more, then they will share in a third. So they could be 2, 3, 4, 5, and going upwards, there is no upper limit, they will share in a third. Now comes the important part. The ayah says brother and sister. One reading this would think it's any brother or sister. And the answer is no, it is not any brother or sister. This ayah is talking about specifically the uterine brothers and sisters. Now you ask, well, where in this ayah is the mention of uterine brothers and sisters? The answer is there is no mention in this ayah. However, there is an ijma', a consensus of the scholars, that this ayah is talking about uterine brothers and sisters. It is not talking about full or consanguine brothers and sisters. The ayah for that is coming up, which is the last ayah of this surah. You will also notice that these uterine brothers and sisters do not inherit in a 2-to-1 ratio. If there are many brothers and many sisters from the mother's side, then they will share equally in a third, not 2-to-1. The 2-to-1 ratio is for the full brothers and sisters or for the consanguine brothers and sisters. You ask, well, why is this the case? Why the difference? And the answer is because Allah said so. And then he says that this is the case after the wasiyah has been dealt with and the debts, غَيْرَ مُضَارٍ, not causing any darar, any harm. Meaning to say, the wasiyah, let's suppose it is to give charity. It should not harm the inheritors by giving charity of more than a third of your wealth, because that is the limit set by the Sharia. We also have a narration in which Abu Hurairah reports that the Prophet ﷺ said that a man or a woman works righteousness for 60 years. إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَعْمَلُ أَوْ امْرَأَةٌ بِطَاعَةِ اللَّهِ 60 سَنَةً. They obey Allah Jalla wa Ala for 60 years. ثُمَّ يَحْضُرُهُمَا الْمَوْتِ, then death comes to them, meaning the man or the woman. فَيُضَارَّانِ فِي الْوَصِيَّةِ فَتَجِبُ لَهُمْ النَّارِ. Then when making their wasiyah, the bequest, they harm their inheritors, and the fire becomes wajib for them. So it's entirely possible that a person wants to harm their inheritors by giving too much wealth in charity so that the inheritors receive less. And there could be other tricks and strategies deployed to harm the inheritors. A husband may divorce his wife, for example, when he fears he might die, to deprive his wife of her inheritance. All of this is haram. The غَيْرَ مُضَارٍ, غَيْر, is mansub bil-fatha because it is a hal. So the person making the wasiyah must do so whilst he or she is in a state of not harming the inheritors. Then it says wasiyatan min Allah. This is a wasiyah from Allah. We said wasiyah is an order about an important matter, and inheritance is for sure a vital matter. Why is it wasiyatan with the fatha? It is the same as with the previous ayah where he said faridatan min Allah. It is a maf'ul mutlaq which is used to emphasize all that which has preceded in this ayah. Anyway, let's reflect on this ayah. We immediately take that Allah Jalla wa Ala is giving quite a bit of detail about the inheritance, so He's taking this matter seriously. Normally Allah Jalla wa Ala does not go into so much detail about fiqhi matters in the Quran. The details are normally taken from the ahadith, but the matter of inheritance does stand out as quite the exception. We also find that you have no choice in this matter. The inheritance transfers to you at the moment of death, as long as it is known that you are alive after the death of the deceased and you are a legitimate inheritor, then the wealth is transferred over to you automatically, whether you like it or not. And no one else has any right to it. And in particular, no one else has the right of a shufu'ah, which is when you can buy out a person in a particular wealth and forcefully take that wealth from them. The matter of a shufu'ah is dealt with in a bit more detail in the fiqh presentations. The point is that shufu'ah does apply to sales transactions and even any other transferal of ownership, but it does not apply to inheritance. If your father and his friend shared a plot of land, your father dies, and that plot of land, meaning your father's share, goes to you as the inheritor, then your father's friend, who is the sharer, cannot forcefully buy you out and pay you the money and take the other half of the land, which was formerly your father's. Normally he would be able to do that if your father sold his share of the land, but in inheritance matters, they are much more, if you like, forceful, and no one is allowed to deprive you of this inheritance wealth. We also take that the wife inherits. Now, if one asks, what if the husband dies before consummating the marriage? Would the wife inherit in that case? The answer is yes. The woman becomes a wife at the time of the contract, not at the time of consummating the marriage. One might say, but if the husband or wife dies, does the marriage contract not come to an end? And if so, why would they inherit? We say the marriage contract does come to an end, except there still remains the effects of the marriage contract. And so therefore it is permissible for the husband to wash the corpse of his wife and vice versa, even though they are not strictly married, because you cannot be married to a dead person, but the effects of marriage still remain shortly after the death. We also notice that the children affect the inheritance of the spouses. They will decrease the inheritance of the spouses, whether the children are sons or daughters. We also take, just like the last ayah, that there can be no inheritance matters until after the debts have been paid off and the wasiyah has been dealt with. We also take that it is possible that the wife leaves the wasiyah, because notice what he says, min ba'di wasiyatin yusina biha aw dayn, after the wasiyah that they leave behind, talking about the wives. So we can take from that that the wives are free to do with their wealth as they want to. The husband cannot tell them to do one way or the other, because it is the wife's wealth and she's in charge of her wealth. As long as she is of sound mind and can work with her wealth in a sensible manner, then she is free. We also notice a 2-to-1 ratio between the inheritance of the husband and the wife. So the shares for the husband is a half and a quarter, depending on whether there are children, and the shares for the wives are a quarter and an eighth, depending on children. So you see the fractions for the wife are half that of the husband. We also notice that Allah Jalla wa Ala begins with the husband's share and then he goes on to the women's share. So men are to be begun with because their matter usually is more important, Nowadays in the West, it's the other way around. They say ladies and gentlemen, and they say ladies first and that type of thing. We also take that Allah Jalla wa Ala is hugely concerned with the debts being paid off and the wasiyah being implemented, as He makes mention of these matters 3 times in this ayah. We also take the 2 names of Allah Jalla wa Ala, Alim and Halim, so that He is knowledgeable about His laws and that the ahkam are based on knowledge. He is Halim, forbearing, so that He will not immediately take people to account if they do wrong. Rather, He gives them the chance to repent. Let's look at ayah number 13. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَنْ يُطِعْ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا وَذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. He says, Tilka, those are the hudud, the limits of Allah. He's referring to the inheritance rulings. And whoever yuti' Allah, obeys Allah and His Messenger, yudkhilhu, He will make him to enter, meaning Allah will make him to enter, jannatin, gardens, with rivers running on the ground, khalidina fiha, forever therein. And that is the great success. All these words have preceded, there's nothing new. Notice when he says hudud, or limits of Allah, this refers to the ahkam of Allah, the rules of Allah. So just like limits are not to be transgressed, that's why they exist in the first place, so then the ahkam of Allah Jalla wa Ala are not to be disobeyed, because disobeying means you have overstepped the limits. So reflecting on this ayah, the inheritance, the mawarith, are from the limits of Allah, which must not be transgressed, meaning disobeyed. And we also learn that obeying the rules of the inheritance, which is of course from obedience of Allah and the Messenger, then this is a cause for you to enter Jannah. We notice that Allah and the Messenger are mentioned side by side together. Is this appropriate to mention someone other than Allah side by side with Allah? Well, we say in matters of the Sharia, Allah and the Messenger can be mentioned side by side. But as for universal matters, kawniyah, then Allah cannot be mentioned with the Messenger, because the Messenger has no say in matters of universal affairs. So we're talking about natural laws that we observe around us. We also take that Jannah exists and people in it will dwell forever. We also take something of the description of Jannah, which is that it has rivers flowing on the ground, from which obviously people can drink forever on. We also take the vital lesson that entering Jannah is the ultimate success, not being rich in this world. That money will do nothing for you when you are buried 6 feet under. هذا والله أعلم.